Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. A housekeeping note for the month of February. I will not be here tomorrow night, although I'll post and record. Next week, Monday, Tuesday, I'm out. The next week, Monday, Tuesday, I'm out. And the next week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm out. So I'll keep you posted as things move along. I'll see you all in March. It's going to be great. Somebody should teach this Masechta because I'm done. I'm checked out now.
Well, when you're out,
Yeah.
you're stuff to end.
Just about. Not really.
Well, yeah, if you're out for the whole last week of February, it ends on the 29th.
I will not be here for that week. Yeah. Okay. We are 7 lines down on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. We had spoken about this idea in the Mishnah that Gazal Para Me'uberes V'Yalda, if a thief stole a cow that was expecting. So the Mishnah spoke about the din there. Let's learn a correlating brisa, one that we'll see in more depth in Maseches Bava Metzia Tanu Rabbanan. Hagozel Rachel Ugezaza, someone who stole a female sheep and sheared its wool. Para V'Yalda, stole a cow, and that animal then had a calf. Mishalim Osa, you have to pay the principal. Ve'eskiz Oseha, ve'esvlad Oseha, Divri Rav Meir. The Ganev, the gazlan, I should say, has to pay both. He has to pay the principal and he has to pay the Shvach. He has to pay whatever improvements took place while it was in his property. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, Gzela Choseres Be'ene. Just the initial item that was stolen is given back, but not the Shvach. And then, while seemingly almost an identical opinion, Reb Shimon Omer, Rowan Osaki Ilu Hishuma Etzlo Bekesef. We simply view it as a monetary cost, which is a difficult line to understand on its own. And it also seems to be very similar to Rabbi Yehuda, a question that the Gemara will ask on the Amud Beis. And based off of this brisa, the Gemara asks as follows: Ibaylehu, my taima de Rav Meir. Rav Meir has the unique shita that if you steal a para and it's pregnant, or if you steal a Rachel and it has the wool still on it, that you have to return the Shvach as well. So says the Gemara, what is the svara of Rav Meir? 2 possibilities. If you want to say that Mishum de Kasavar Shinui b'Makoma Omeid, that your kinyan doesn't matter, okay, that's a possibility. Any changes that you make to the item that you stole, and we spoke about this at length yesterday. If you want to say that changes that you make to the item that you stole are irrelevant, then I understand. Okay, there was a change. The change is irrelevant. Give back everything. Whatever happens, happens. So if it has a calf while it's in the gazlan's property, then give back the calf too. Then I understand that. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps, again, we're having a little bit of a chakira within Rav Meir. Perhaps we should say that really Be'alma in general, Dilma Be'alma Shinui Kona, that really when significant changes happen to the item that I stole, then really the gazlan is Kona. And really, all he should have to do is return the actual principal. However, v'hacha knasahu dekakanis. Here, the Chachamim have created a knas, a slap on the wrist, that in addition to returning that which he stole, he's being penalized, and he also has to return the shvach. So we don't know. Does Rav Meir hold that shinui is kona, or does Rav Meir not hold that shinui is kona? The Mainaf Gemina, what would the difference between these 2 approaches be? The Gemara responds, and we're about a third of the way down on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. The difference would be Lahecha de Kachsha Mikachesh. Okay, I could understand if you tell me that the animal had a shvach while it was in the property of the gazlan, and we want to slap him on the wrist, so then he has to pay back the shvach. What happens if it's the kachsha mikchash, that the value depreciates in the property of the gazlan? That would be a big difference. If you say that there's a knas, so what happens over here? Really, the gazlan owns it, and there's no knas because you're in the minus now. So how would we view this? That would be the difference between these 2 svaras of whether or not we say shinui is kone or shinui is not kone. And we're going to have 2 attempts to answer this question. The first will fail, the second will succeed. Says the Gemara, Tashma, third of the way down, Gazal behema v'hiskina. If you steal an animal and then it becomes very aged in your property, and we don't mean, of course, by minutes, but we mean in a depreciative kind of way. Says the Gemara, avadim v'hiskino, or I steal your eved and he, joins AARP while he is, maybe that's too young. We need that. We need an older. What?
ARP is what, like 60?
No,
50.
55.
55.
50 or 55.
It's too young. Lemaisa, in our era, it's too young. Yeah. You got time. It's not 50. I think it's 55.
55.
Yeah. Why are we talking about AARP? I'm sorry.
You
I'm
brought
sorry.
it up.
I know. Well, you made it into a conversation. Let's Okay. And then avadim v'hizkino, or if you steal my eved and my eved significantly ages in your property, mishalem kishas agzela. We look back to the person's value from the time that you stole it. If you stole the eved on January 1st of 2023, and now it's January 1st of 2053, and now your eved is 83 years old, you stole him when he was 53 years old, that's a big difference. You pay him for the value that he had on day one, which was now, which is significantly more than a person who is less capable. Rav Meir Omer be'avadim, when it comes to avadim, remember we're trying to figure out Rav Meir, so let's watch his unique parsing of this din. Rav Meir Omer be'avadim, in regards to an eved, Omer lo hareshal chalafanecha. When it comes to an eved, you give back the eved as is, at age 83, irrelevant of depreciation. However, v'ilu behema, when it comes to an animal, then we go back in time. Kishas agzela. Okay, now we've learned the brisa, and now we have to analyze the brisa and see how perhaps this might explain how Rav Meir holds as to whether or not shinui is kona. Okay, let's. The Gemara is not really going to discuss this at length, but we'll. I mean, it does discuss it, but not in Lumdus. We'll see. Let's get through the argument first. Now, the isal kadaitach, if you want to say like one side of the chakira, that sava Rab Meir shinui b'makomo omed, that your changes to an animal are completely irrelevant, then afilu behema nami, then who cares? Then who cares about the behema? Because at the end of the day, the behema, why are you returning the behema at the value of the moment it was stolen? You should give it back as is. If you're saying that there's no difference in the kinyan, we don't have to look back in time. You just pay as is. Elolav, it must therefore be that shma mina kasavar Rav Meir shinui kone v'hacha knasahu dikokanis. It must be that according to this brisa, that really Rav Meir holds that shinui is kone. And really, in our brisa at where we started today, at the 2 dots, 8 lines down, that brisa where it says that according to Rav Meir, you have to pay the shvach as well, that the gazlan has to pay the shvach and not just the keren, that's because v'hacha kansahu dekakanis, it's a slap on the wrist as discussed before. So that would be an answer to our question. But the Gemara says, you've learned the brisa a little bit incorrectly. Amrei, Rav Meir would respond to this, that's not true. Rav Meir l'divrehim derabanan ka'amar lahu. Rav Meir wasn't sharing his own shita. Rav Meir was saying, according to you, the Rabbanan, who just said that first shita in this brisa, who had said that that gazal behema v'hizkino navadim v'hizkino, that you have to pay kishas agzela, Rav Meir was pushing back according to their svar. He wasn't saying his own shita. Lididi shinui ein kona v'afilu behema nami. According to me, there is no such thing as a kinyan. You can't make a change that's significant enough. You always have to give back the animal. It says the Gemara, what Rav Meir is saying, that according to you, the amrisu shinui kone, you hold that a shinui does create a kinyan. Oduli mihas be'avda we have to distinguish between an eved, which is like karka, and a behema, which is not like karka. And that, to Stan's question, is why Rav Meir had to distinguish between an eved and a behema. By an eved, Omer lo hareshel chalafanecha. That was what he said, because that has a similar din to karka, and karka is ein exelis. But by the behema, so there, that fits perfectly with the shita of the Rabbanan, and therefore, the Rabbanan push back and say, "Lo, I disagree, Rav Meir, with how you've understood us. Why? Because avda kimetaltale dami." Wow. Okay, so this is a big machlokas. We've seen this before, but we typically assume that an eved is like karka. Over here, we see, in fact, that there's a machlokas as to whether or not an eved has a din of karka, yes or no. And because the conversation has pivoted to this, therefore, this brisa is no longer a good mari makom to answer our question as to whether or not Rav Meir holds of shinui kone or shinui ein kono. So let's try again. Tashma, let's say that you go to this guy who dyes things for a living, and litzbo alo edom utzvao shachor. Not good. You give him your fancy cashmere and you say, please dye this red, and he makes a mistake and dyes it black. That's not good. Shachor utzva'o edom. or I want you to dye it black, and instead you dyed it red. Better that mistake than the other way. You can get to black faster than you can undo the black. Either way, Rav Meir Omer, no sein lo demei tzimro. What does Rav Meir say? You have to pay only the cost of the tzemer itself. So let's say the tzemer was $10 worth of tzemer, and he made this error in dyeing. So then you have to pay back the cost of the tzemer. And the Gemara is medayik. Demei tzimro in, when we talk about the payback of the error of the person who's dying, he has to pay back the cost of the wool. But demei tzimro ushvacho lo. But he doesn't have to pay back the tzemer and the shvach, meaning now this really is worth more. When it was colorless or whatever the natural color is of wool, it was $10. Now that it's dyed, it's worth $15, even though it's a color that I don't want. But here, we're not saying that the guy has to pay back the shvach. And therefore, if you're trying to say within Rav Meir that really there is no kinyan, then what we should have seen over here is that Rav Meir would have required that the person dyeing the wool who made this error should pay back not only the principal cost of the tzemer, which is $10, but the new market value, because now it has a color that it didn't before. Granted, not the color I wanted, but still, it's much more expensive, or 50% more expensive than it was before, and we don't see that. Elolav, it must therefore be 3/4 of the way down. Shma mina, kasavar Rav Meir shinui kone. It must therefore be the Rav Meir holds that a change of significance is in fact enough for a gazlan to create a kinyan. And v'hacha knasahu de kakanish shma mina. Conclusion. That's how the Gemara actually concludes, according to Rav Meir, that Rav Meir holds that shinui is kone. Good to know for Shas. Good to know. These things come up a lot. And then the Gemara says, really, we might have had the question wrong the whole time. Says the Gemara, Ika de Amre ha lo iboilon mi de apich rav vitani. The brisa that we started with at the top of the page, where we spoke about a gozel, Rachel ugezaza, and Paraviyalda, perhaps that case is actually a little bit different. Not that brisa. The other one about Paravi Hiskina. Excuse me. The brisa about Paravi Hiskina and Avadim Hiskino. So the Gemara says that really Rav had a different version of the brisa than we presented in our Gemara. Says the Gemara, Gazal Paravi Hiskina, if a man steals a cow and it ages, or Avadim Hiskino, or steals an Eved and he ages, Mishalem Kshasa Gzela, Divir Rav Meir. Rav Meir says you have to pay based on the time of the theft. The Chachamim Omrim, this is the reverse. Remember, Rav Meir in the previous brisa distinguished between Avadim and Behema. Here we're flipping the shitas where the Chachamim make that distinction, and Rav Meir does not. The Chachamim Omrim ba'Avadim Omer lo harei shalcha lefanecha, and there it's a little bit different. So the Gemara says, based on this brisa, based on Rav's version of the brisa, the flipped version of the brisa, the Gemara says, V'adai le Rav Meir shinui konen. Rav Meir would for sure hold that a shinui is kohen. Based on this flipped version, for sure we understand Rav Meir. But if in fact there's a question, this is the question, and this is what we're going to deal with for the next little bit. Do we say that really the kinyan takes place, and really the gazlan only owes the amount of money that was what he stole? But we slap him on the wrist and say you have to pay the shvach as well. That's what Rav Meir typically holds. But what happens if it's done b'shogeg? Kikakan is b'mezid. I understand if you want to give a knas when it was done intentionally. However, aval b'shogeg lo kanis. Let's say that this action was done b'shogeg. Would we still say that there's a knas, that the gazlan has to pay the shvach? Odilma afilu b'shogeg nami kanis. Yes or no? Do we say that mezid versus shogeg is a nafkamina in regards to the gazlan paying a shvach? The Gemara here presents two answers. Here's answer number 1, 10 lines or so from the bottom of the page. Tzadi Hey Amar Aleph. Toshma, we have a brisa. Chamisha govin min ha-mechurarin. There are 5 who collect from mechurarin, properties that are chorin, properties that are free, namely properties that don't have a lien on them. We are familiar in halacha with properties that are mishubadim. So here we're talking about properties that are not mishubad. And there are 5 case scenarios where money is collected from lienless properties. What are they? Ve'eluhein peiros u'shvach peiros. We'll discuss what those are in the Gemara. Ve'hamekabel alav lazun ben ishto ubas ishto. One who accepts upon himself to sustain his stepson or his stepdaughter. The get chov, a document of collecting money, she'ein bo achrayis. If there's a get chov, really, this is not how it's supposed to be. Really, when you write a shtar chov, it usually should be tied to karka, but this person didn't do that. Or v'ksubas isha she'ein bo achrayis. This is really problematic because a ksuba really should always be tied to karka as a protective measure to make sure that women are not easily dismissed from their marriages. Nevertheless, this is what the brisa says. This brisa is in Maseches Ksubas. We actually learned this already, even though I don't remember it. The Gemara says, whose shita is this, that you can have a ksuba without a lien? How is that safe? How is that the right setup? That doesn't work. Man shamasle de amar achrayis lav ta'us soferhu. Who is the shita who says that a shtar chov that lacks achrayis with karka, who is the person who says that that's not a ta'us sofer? Says the Gemara, Rav Meir. That's a shita of Rav Meir. The Katani, and nevertheless, if this in fact still is Rav Meir, then what do we see? We see that this brisa says that 2 of the 5 things that are collected from properties without a lien are peros u'shvach peros. Now we don't know what these are yet. Peros we kind of know. What are shvach peros? Remember, that's what we've been discussing, and that's what we're trying to figure out, is do we say that there's a difference between shogeg and mezid as it relates to shvach peros? So says the Gemara, what is that second example of 5 things that are collected from lienless properties? Shvach peros hechidami, says the Gemara. Kigon shegazal sadeh mechavero. I steal your field. We should already have a yellow alarm going off in our head, which is that how do you steal karka? Karka is eina nigzelis, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. But let's say that there was I stole your field, whatever that means. And then, umachra la'acher, I steal your field, and then I sell it, v'hishpicha, and while it's in the buyer's property, the price goes up, v'harehi yotze mitachas yado, and then the person who actually owns the property found out and wants to get it back. And kshehu gove, when the actual owner collects, what does he collect? Remember, we're talking about Rav Meir here, turning to the top of Tzadi Hayim at Beis. We'll be going until about 15 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Gove es hakeren minechasim mishubadim. The principal cost we collect from properties with a lien. However, the es hashvach minachasim b'nei choren. But when we're collecting the shvach, the growth, the appreciation that took place after the ganav sold it to another person, that's collected from a property that's ben choren. The asa bal ara v'shakil ara ushvache. And what we see over here is that in this case, that you're collecting from a property that's b'nei choren, you're collecting the shvach from there. That's when the original owner collects it. Now, as mentioned, this is a house of cards. You can't even steal property. You can't steal karka. Karka is eina nigzeles. So says the Gemara, my law, based on the fact that we know that karka is eina nigzeles, must we be talking about, or I should say, we must be talking about be'am ha'aretz, de lo yada de karka nigzeles, o eina nigzeles. It must be like, I don't know, like one of us who thinks we know what we're talking about, or like, what do you mean? Karka is eina nigzeles. And this guy, the Am Haaretz, who's sitting there holding there, he didn't know if it was karka and nigzeles. Even though that was true, and this was the shogeg, he made a halachic shogeg, right? It's not like he accidentally stole. He stole, but the flow of events was under a faulty assumption that karka was nigzeles. And even so, ka'asi bal karka v'shakil la'ara v'shvacha v'shmamina v'shogeg nami kanis. So perhaps we can learn from here that even in the case of shogeg, that knas would be collected, Amri, the Gemara says, lo, that's not a good psak, but rather belokeach talmud chacham v'yada. That's the gzela was still a gzela in some way because he sold it to somebody else. It wasn't a gzela that related to the karka, but he literally sold your property to another person. But it was a house of cards in a certain way as well. So there's kind of a little bit in both worlds. But the misunderstanding of the din of karka ein and nigzeles, it's a weird shogeg. Okay, it's a weird shogeg, but that's what the Gemara is referring to here as a shogeg to try and bring out this idea. And the Gemara says that no, that really we're talking about belokeach talmud chacham v'yada. He knew that it was karka ein and nigzeles. He knew that, and therefore you cannot learn from this case. So let's try from the second case. 6 lines down, 7 lines down on Tzadi Hey Amud Beis Tashma. Let's go back to the brisa we saw on the previous Amud. We saw brisa litzvo alo edom utzva'o shachor, that if I asked you to dye my wool red, and you mistakenly dyed it black, or the reverse. Shach or utzvo adom. Rav Meir Omer no seno d'meit simro. You just have to pay the cost of the $10 of wool that I gave you. D'meit simro in, d'meit simra ushvacho lo. Now, v'isal kadaitach b'shogeg nami kanis. Remember, this was a case of shogeg. The guy who was dyeing the wool, Pasha made a mistake. He looked at the wrong order. He thought the Karesh order was supposed to be red. It wasn't the Karesh order. It was the next person in line. I get phone calls every year. Hi, is this Rabbi Karesh from Northbrook? I get phone calls like that every few months. It's just a Pasha, a mistake. So what do you do? So says the Gemara, if you want to say that with shogeg that there is a knas, then then we should have seen over here where it was a clear as day shogeg. He wasn't lahaches dying at the wrong. He made a mistake. He made a mistake. But we don't see that. Elolav, it must therefore be shmamina, the mezid kanis b'shogeg lo kanis, that the only time we have the knas making the gazlan pay shvach, that's only if the act that he did was b'mezid, but b'shogeg lo kanis, shmamina, end of sugya. So we had two possible questions in the Gemara, and we ended up with answers to both of those questions. We had said in our in one of the earlier brises that we saw today on Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph, and we're going to now quote it. This really kind of sort of should be a two dots kind of a deal. Rabbi Yehuda Omer gzela chozeres be'ene. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that the gzela just goes back, the Karen basically just goes back. And then we quoted a similar shita that was seemingly just a hand-to-glove match to Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Shimon Omer roan osaki ilu hishuma etzlo bekesef, that we measure it by dollars. So again, both of those seem to say we just give back the Karen. Asks the Gemara a third of the way down, my beinayu. What is the difference between them? Says the Gemara, the difference between these two shitas of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon is Amar Rav Zvid, b'shvach she'al gabe gzela kamiflage. We're talking about a case of shvach she'al gabe gzela. What is that talking about? That's talking about where all of the improvement took place in the property of the gazlan. He didn't steal a pregnant cow, and he didn't steal a sheep that was laden with wool. It all happened after the theft. So that's different. There, Rabbi Yehuda savar the nigzal have. That's considered to have been stolen. That's considered to belong to the nigzal, the one who was stolen from. The Rabbi Shimon savar the gazlan have, that those changes belong to the thief. Okay, that's answer number one. Rav Papa Amar the kule alma shvach she'al gabe gzela the gazlan have. Everyone agrees that the shvach really belongs to the gazlan, pasha, because that's not what he stole. If the animal was impregnated after it was stolen, it should belong to the. It didn't happen in his property. The conception happened later. So that's why everybody says, according to Rav Papa, everybody agrees that the shvach she'al gabe gzela, that if the shvach took place only in the property of the gazlan, that it for sure goes to the gazlan. Here we're dealing with something else, and that is that typically speaking, when there are multiple parties involved with shvach, let's say I hire you to work my field, and while you're working my field, there's shvach, I give you a percentage of the shvach as payment. So maybe that's what's going on over here. That Rav Yehuda savar, we're about a little bit more than a third of the way down. Rav Yehuda savar, shvach shal gabe gzela kula de gazlan habe, that really all of it, 100% of the shvach goes to the gazlan. Reb Shimon savar lemechsel shlish v'lerviyahu de shakil gazlan. It just depends on what you negotiate, but he certainly doesn't own all of it. He only gets a percentage. Now we're going to ask on the difference between the answers that we just saw, the answer of Rav Zvid and Rav Papa. Let's review. Rav Zvid was of the opinion that everyone agrees. Rav Zvid was of the opinion that the machlokas is about whether or not the shvach belongs to the nigzal or if the shvach belongs to the gazlan. Rav Papa said that everything belongs to the gazlan. The only question is he like a partner in that he only pays a percentage, he only keeps a percentage, or does he keep it all? So it's not. We have a mishnah. Gazal para v'nis abra etzlo yalda. You stole a para from me. It was not pregnant, and then it conceived while it was in your property and had a calf. Or Rachel that was sheared in my property, v'nit anna, it became laden with wool in your property, etzlo, ugezaza. So then says the Gemara, mishalem kishas hagzela. The halacha is that the gazlan has to pay back the gzela. This matches with what we were saying because all the changes took place in the property of the gazlan. So what does he have to pay? Pasha, he only has to pay what he stole, which is not this new version. Yalda in. If the animal gave birth, that is when we will say that the animal belongs to the gazlan. But let's say that the animal didn't yet give birth. The animal conceived, but by the time Bezdin figured out who stole and it was time to give back, then the animal had yet to give birth. Lo yolda hadra beina. You have to give back the animal as is. Now, Bishlam al Rav Zvid, this works out nicely according to Rav Zvid, to Amar Shvach she'al gabeg zela din nigzal have, that one shita says that it actually belongs to the bailim, because look what's happening, you're giving back the pregnant animal. That's have, that's Rav Yehuda. Yeah, correct. Amar Shvach she'al gabeg zela din nigzal have Rav Yehuda. Hamani Rav Yehuda he. That works out beautifully according to Rav Yehuda. Elo Rav Papa, the Amar Gazlan have. According to Rav Papa, who says that there is no machlokes about this, that everything belongs to the gazlan, hamani, lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rab Shimon. Nobody seems to hold this way according to Rav Papa's understanding of Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda's machlokes. So Amar Lech Rav Papa, and we have about 6 more lines to go. Hu adin afilu lo yalda nami kshas hagzelu mishalim. No. Really, even if the animal had yet to give birth but was still pregnant, it still should be paid back kishas hagzela. It should still be paid back at the cost of the animal before it conceived, but right the moment it was stolen. The Hadaktani Yalda, the only reason why it says Yalda was not to make a diuk from, like we just made, but I did the Nasiv Resha Yalda, Nasiv Seifa Nami Yalda. It was only for the sake of symmetry, as we often say by Mishnayos and Brises, that they were written in a way that was easier to remember. And Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa, we have a Brisa just like this, which shows us that the word Yalda should not be inferred from. The Gemara says, Tanya Kavase de Rav Papa, Rav Shimon Omer Rowan Osa Ki'ilu Hishuma Etzlo Bekesef Lemechza L'Shlish V'Lervia. That Rav Shimon was of the opinion that we view this animal as though there's a shuma, as though we make an approximation, namely there's some kind of partnership-ish kind of thing going on, and the gazlan is holding on to the shvach, he either gets paid Lemechza L'Shlish V'Lervia. So that's how we try and navigate this question of the Gemara and trying to figure out the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. We gave 2 different approaches, one of Rav Zvid and one of Rav Papa, and both of them seem to stand the test of time. We'll stop right here. We'll pick up Emir Tashem tomorrow night in a recording, no shiur tomorrow night in person, and we'll post before the learning time. And that's it. Wishing you all a beautiful night.